Voicemail was 19 seconds long. I know because I played it back 40 times that first night, sitting at my kitchen table in Sudbury with the snow coming down sideways past the window, and every single time those 19 seconds took a little more out of me. Hi, it's me. So, the engagement dinner is going to be a smaller thing than we planned. James's people are pretty formal, and I just think it'll be easier if you watch the toast over FaceTime. I'll have my cousin hold the phone. Okay. Talk soon. That was it. No, Mom. No, love you. Just it's me, like I was somebody she dialed by accident. My name is Teresa Macaulay. Everyone back home calls me Reese, as done since I was a girl on Manitoulin Island. I'm 63 years old, and I spent 26 of those years raising my daughter on my own after her father drowned through the ice on Lake Wanapite the winter she turned 5. I drove school bus mornings and afternoons for the Rainbow District Board, and in between, I cleaned offices on Larch Street and took in mending. And I want to be clear about something before I tell you the rest. I never once made my girl feel that money was tight. Even when I was paying the hydro bill in coins I'd rolled myself. She had skates that fit. She had the band trip to Ottawa. She had her university residence paid in full at Queen's, so she'd never have to wait tables the way I did. I gave her everything I had, and a fair bit I didn't, and I did it gladly, and that's the part that makes the rest so hard to say out loud. Because by the time my daughter was getting ready to marry a man named James Whitlock, whose family owns half a development company in Oakville, she had quietly decided that the woman who raised her was an embarrassment she could no longer afford. I didn't see it all at once. That's the thing nobody tells you. It doesn't arrive like a slap. It arrives like frost, one cold morning at a time, until one day you look, and the whole window's gone white, and you can't see through to your own child anymore. And what I found underneath all of it, once I finally went looking, was so much worse than a daughter ashamed of where she came from. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and you deserve to hear it the way it happened to me. So before I tell you what I did when I drove 400 kilometers south and walked into that rehearsal dinner uninvited, with a folder under my arm and 3 people behind me who remembered the truth, do me a small kindness first. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you've ever bled yourself dry for someone who ended up treating you like a stain on their tablecloth, leave a like, because by the time we're through here, you're going to understand exactly why being told to watch my own daughter's wedding on a phone screen turned out to be the kindest thing she ever did for me. She just didn't know it yet. It started in a 2-bedroom on Notre Dame Avenue, the upstairs of a house that always smelled of the landlord's pipe tobacco. Her name is Bridget. Bridget Ann Macaulay, after my own mother. When she was small, she used to climb into the bus with me on snow days, when the schools were closed, but the board still wanted the routes checked, and she'd sit behind me with her thermos of hot chocolate and narrate the whole town as we went by. There's the Tims, there's the church, there's the lady with the angry dog. She had a gift for noticing people. I used to think that gift would make her kind. I had it backwards. It made her good at reading exactly who was worth her time and who wasn't. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and we had routine, and routine is its own kind of love when you're poor. Friday nights were grilled cheese and the hockey game on CBC, her feet tucked under my leg on the Chesterfield. Sundays we'd drive out to Manitoulin to see my mother, 3 hours each way, and Bridget would do her homework in the back seat by the dome light coming home in the dark. I helped her with that homework as best I could, though I'll be honest with you the way some of you in the comments are always honest with me. I left school myself at the end of grade 10 to look after my younger brothers when our dad got hurt at Inco. So when Bridget's math got past a certain point, I couldn't follow it anymore, and I'd sit with her anyway making tea, looking things up at the library, finding her a tutor through the church when I couldn't do it myself. I want you to hear that clearly because I know somebody always asks. I couldn't teach her calculus, but I made sure she had someone who could, and I sat up with her while she cried over it, and that's a kind of help too. She got into Queen's Commerce. I cried in the IGA parking lot when she phoned to tell me, just sat there with the groceries melting and bawled like a fool. First in the family ever to go to university, I picked up a third shift cleaning to cover what loans and bursaries didn't. And I never told her that because a mother doesn't hand her child a bill for being loved. The changes were small at first. After she graduated, she took a job with a marketing firm in Toronto, and the visits home got shorter and farther between. That's normal, I told myself. Young people are busy, but then the phone call started feeling like she was reading from a script, and I know to stop telling people I drove a bus. My mum works in transportation, she said once, at a dinner I'd driven down for, when one of her colleagues asked. Transportation, like I sat in a glass tower, routing freight instead of scraping ice off a windshield at 5 in the morning so other people's children could get to school. Then there was the way she started talking. The flat northern vowels she grew up with smoothed themselves out. She started saying she'd grown up just north of the city, which I suppose is technically true if 400 kilometers counts as just north. She used the word cottage where we'd always said camp. Little things, a wallpapering over of the girl I knew, and every time I'd say something that gave us away. Call the couch, the Chesterfield, ask if she wanted a pop, mention the camp on the island, she'd go quiet and tight. And once, just once, she said, "Mom, you might want to watch how you talk around James's family. They notice things." They noticed things, as if I were a stain you could spot from across a room. The wedding planning began, and I was not part of it. I found out the date from a save the date my sister forwarded me a photo of, because mine never came. When I called Bridget about it, she laughed it off. "Oh, Mom, the mail up there is so slow. I'm sure yours is coming." It never came. I offered to make the tourtière for the rehearsal dinner, the recipe my mother brought from Quebec that Bridget used to beg for. We've got it catered, but thanks. I offered to do the readings. James's aunt is handling all that. Every door I knocked on she had already locked from the inside and hung a little sign on that said handled. And then came the part I still don't fully understand, the part where she stopped mentioning me to his family at all. I learned it the way you learn most terrible things, sideways, by accident. James's mother sent Bridget a message meant for the wedding party group, and Bridget's phone was sitting face up on the table when she stepped out to take a call, the weekend I'd driven down to help. I wasn't snooping. It just lit up. So glad Bridget was raised by her aunt after losing her parents so young. She turned out so resilient. Losing her parents so young, raised by her aunt. I was sitting 8 feet away in the flesh, alive, having driven 4 hours to be useful to her and to the family she was marrying into. I was a dead woman. She had killed me off in the story of her life because a living bus driver mother was harder to explain than a tragic orphan past. When she came back in, I didn't say a word about it. I don't know why. Shock, maybe, or maybe some last scrap of hope that I'd misread it. I drove home to Sudbury the next morning and I cried the whole stretch past Parry Sound. And I told myself the way I'd told myself for years that it was a phase. That money does funny things to young people, that she'd remember who pulled her out at the snowbank when the bus skidded, who sat up with her through the mumps and the heartbreaks and the failed driving test. She'd come back to herself. The voicemail came 2 weeks before the wedding. "Watch the toast on FaceTime. My cousin will hold the phone. I want to tell you what those words did to me, but I'm not sure I have them. I sat at that table a long time. The furnace kicked on and off. The snow stopped and started. And somewhere in those hours, something in me went very, very quiet. And out of that quiet, for the first time in years, I started to think clearly. Not angrily. Clearly, I thought, I am not going to beg. I have begged for scraps of my own daughter for 3 years, and I am done. But I am also not going to disappear because I am her mother, and mothers do not evaporate just because their children are ashamed of them. So I did something I had never once done in 26 years. I started looking into my own daughter's life. It began with the mail. I'd been getting envelopes for a while addressed to Bridget at my house, and I'd always just bundled them up and mailed them down to Toronto without a thought. Bills, I assumed. Nothing of mine. But that night I started opening them, and my hands went cold. Credit card statements. 3 of them from banks I'd never dealt with, all in my name. Teresa Macaulay, my address, my date of birth, which she knew, of course she knew it. Balances that made the room tilt. $11,000 at a furniture place in Yorkville. $4,000 at a jewelry. A line of credit I had never applied for, drawn down nearly to its limit. I sat there in my kitchen with these papers fanned out in front of me like a hand of cards. I'd been dealt without ever sitting down at the table, and I understood slowly, the way you understand bad news from a doctor, that my daughter had not only erased me, she had been using the woman she erased. I called the credit bureau the next morning, Equifax. I'll never forget the patient young woman on the line who said, "Ma'am, I'm showing 9 active accounts under your social insurance number. Would you like me to go through them?" 9. I had one card, which I paid off every month like my mother taught me, and a small mortgage I was 11 years into. 9 accounts? She read them out, and I wrote them down with a pencil that shook, and every single one had been opened in the last 2 years, and every single one traced back, when I pulled the threads, to a girl who needed to look wealthy enough to marry into the Whitlock family and didn't have the money to do it honestly. She'd built her whole shining new life on my credit, my name, my clean little record I protected for 40 years, like it was the only nice thing I owned, because in a way it was. Now, I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds, and I've read enough of your comments over the years to know somebody's already typing that I should have gone straight to the police, and you're not wrong. I could have. A lawyer told me later I'd have been well within my rights, that identity theft is identity theft even when it's your own child, especially when it's tens of thousands of dollars. But I'm going to ask you to sit with where I was for a minute. 2 weeks before her wedding, I learned that my daughter had stolen my name to buy a life that had no room in it for me. And a mother's first instinct, even then, God help us, even then, is not to destroy her child. It's to understand, it's to ask why. And underneath the rage, which was real, which was enormous, there was this other thing, quieter and worse. I needed her to look me in the eye, not the police, me. I needed her to stand in front of the people she'd lied to, and the man she was about to marry, and the mother she'd buried alive, and I needed her to see that I had survived being thrown away. So I made a folder. I'm a tidy person, always have been. I put everything in a green accordion folder, the kind I used to organize her school records in, the credit statements, the Equifax report, the forged applications I'd requested copies of with a signature on them that was meant to be mine and wasn't. Photographs. Her first day of kindergarten in the snowsuit I'd sewn the patch on, her on my shoulders at the Sudbury Fall Fair, the 2 of us at her Queen's Convocation, my arm around her, both of us beaming. A photo that proved her parents had not died when she was small, because there I plainly was, alive and proud in a Zella's dress. I put in the obituary from when her father passed with my name in it as his wife. I put in 26 years of being somebody, pressed flat into a green folder. And I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my sister Bridget's aunt, the very aunt who'd supposedly raised the poor orphan. She wept on the phone when I told her what was being said, and she said, "Reese, I will drive through a blizzard to set that straight." The second was to Mr. Bridget's. Okafor, the high school teacher, who'd seen our whole life up close, who'd written Bridget's reference for Queens, who'd had tea in my kitchen 100 times. The third was to Linda from the church, who'd organized the tutor, who'd known us both for 30 years. I asked all 3 of them the same thing. Not to make a scene, just to come and be willing to say, if anyone asked, who I was and who Bridget really was, to be witnesses to a life that was being denied. They all said yes before I finished asking. The rehearsal dinner was at a golf club in Oakville, the kind of place with valet parking and a server for every 2 guests, and I'll tell you, I have cleaned places like that. I have buffed those floors at midnight. I knew exactly what kind of room I was walking into and exactly how out of place I was meant to feel in it, and I put on my good navy dress, the one I bought for my mother's funeral, and I drove 400 kilometers south with my sister beside me and Mr. Bay. Okafor and Linda following in Linda's Corolla, and I did not turn around once, not even at the toll bridge, not even when my hands started shaking on the 400. We walked in during the cocktail hour. I'll never forget the look on Bridget's face. She was holding a glass of white wine, mid-laugh, radiant in a dress that probably cost what I make in a month, and she saw me across that room and the color went out of her like someone had pulled a plug. James saw her face change before he saw me. He's a watchful man, James. I'll give him that. That's the thing that ended up mattering most. Mom. Her voice came out very small, the voice from the back of the bus. What are you're supposed to be on FaceTime, I said. Yes. I got your message. The room had started to go quiet the way rooms do. James stepped forward, polite, confused, and he said, I'm sorry, I don't think Are you a friend of Bridget's family? And there it was, the moment. I could have burned it all down with one sentence. I could have. Instead, I looked at my daughter, and I gave her one chance, because that is what mothers do, even when they shouldn't. Bridget, I said quietly, do you want to tell him who I am, or should I? She didn't answer. She just stood there. And in her silence, I heard every door she'd locked, every handled, every transportation, every photograph she'd cropped me out of. And I turned to James and I said, I'm Teresa Macaulay. I'm Bridget's mother. I'm not dead, and I wasn't raised by anyone's aunt. I raised her by myself on Notre Dame Avenue in Sudbury, driving a school bus. And I set the green folder down on the white tablecloth. I did not shout. I want you to know that. I have replayed it enough to be sure of it. I didn't make a scene the way she'd always feared. I just told the truth in a level voice and let the truth do what truth does. James opened the folder. Nobody stopped him. He looked at the convocation photo first, my arm around his fiancée, both of us alive and northern and proud, and then he turned the pages, and his face did something I have never forgotten. He got to the credit statements. He understood faster than I expected. He's in business. He reads numbers for a living. He looked up at Bridget and he said in a voice gone strange, These are your mother's accounts, in your mother's name. It wasn't a question. And my daughter, my Bridget, the girl who narrated the whole town from the back of my bus, opened her mouth, and the only thing that came out was, I was going to pay it back. I think that's the sentence that did it. Not anything, I said. That sentence, I was going to pay it back. Because it confirmed every page in the folder was true, and it confirmed she'd known, and it confirmed there was no misunderstanding to hide behind. James set the folder down very gently, like it might break, and he said he needed some air, and he walked out of that club, and he did not come back that night. The wedding did not happen 2 days later. I want to be truthful with you. I did not feel triumphant. I had imagined I might. I'd driven 400 kilometers on the fuel of imagining it, but standing in that beautiful room watching my child's whole constructed world come down around her, I felt mostly a terrible bone-deep grief. The same grief I'd felt the morning the ice took her father, the grief of watching something you built with your whole life simply end. The Whitlocks were quiet and cold and correct. James's mother came to me later, near the coat check, and she said, I'm so sorry. For what it's worth, I'd have liked to know you. And she meant it, and that almost broke me more than anything Bridget had done. Here is the part the comments always want, and here is the part I'm proudest of, and they're the same part. I did not press charges. A constable I spoke to back in Sudbury, a kind man about my age, laid it all out plainly. With the documentation I had, it was a clear case. Fraud over $5,000. It could mean a criminal record for my daughter, possibly jail. Certainly the end of any career in finance she'd built her lies to chase. He didn't push me either way. He just said, "It's your name, ma'am. It's your call." And I sat with that for 3 days. I thought about every dollar she'd stolen and every year I'd given. I thought about the obituary in the folder, her father's name and mine. And I thought, I can put my daughter in a cell, or I can make her live the rest of her life knowing exactly who she comes from and exactly who she tried to throw away. One of those is revenge. The other is just sorrow wearing a uniform. So I did neither, quite. I had a lawyer draw up a repayment agreement, every cent, with the debts moved off my name and onto hers, where they belonged, my credit restored, the forged accounts closed. And then I closed the folder and I drove home to the north, where the snow is honest and the people say Chesterfield, and I started to live. I'm telling you it got better, and I need you to believe me because some of you watching are living in the cold part of this story right now, and you need to know there's a far side to it. I took up curling again at the rink I'd quit when money got tight. I started volunteering at the literacy center, sitting with grown men and women, learning to read. People the world had also decided weren't worth much, and I'll tell you there is no medicine on earth like watching a 50-year-old fellow read his granddaughter a bedtime story for the first time. I stopped waiting for my phone to ring. I planted a vegetable garden that the deer mostly ate, and I let them. It was about 10 months later, late September, the leaves just turning up here, when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my drive. Bridget got out. She looked different. Smaller, the way the woman in the story I watched as research once put it, though I didn't know I'd end up telling my own version. Her hair was its own color again, that dishwater brown she used to hate and I always loved. Jeans. A flannel, of all things. She stood at the bottom of the steps and she didn't come up. Mom. Not it's me. Mom. Bridget. She held out a paper bag from the bag. Inside were 2 Tougere pies, badly crimped, clearly her first attempt, my mother's recipe that she'd had to call my sister to get. I made these, she said. They're probably terrible. I didn't say anything. I've learned the power of not filling silences. I've been seeing somebody, she said, a counselor, about why I did it, why I needed so badly to be from somewhere else, to be somebody whose mother didn't. She stopped. I told her the strongest person I ever knew drives a school bus through Sudbury winters and rolled coins to pay the hydro so I'd never know we were poor, and that I spent 2 years trying to bury her because I was ashamed, and the shame was never about you. It was never about you, Mom. It was about me, and I made you carry it. The leaves were coming down. I let her stand there and finish. I paid it all back, she said. Every dollar. It took everything I had, and it should have, and I'm not here to ask you to forget it. I just wanted to bring you the pies and tell you the truth in front of your own door for once, even if you close it on me. Especially if you close it on me. I looked at my daughter a long time, and I saw underneath the 31 years and the wreckage the little girl on the bus pointing out the lady with the angry dog. You don't stop being someone's mother. It's not a thing you can return. They're not terrible, I said. You haven't tried them. I don't have to. You made them. Come inside. It's getting cold. We didn't fix it that afternoon. I want to be honest with you, because you've been honest with me. It's not fixed even now, not all the way, and maybe it never will be all the way, and I've made my peace with that. But she came inside, and we ate badly crimped tourtière at the kitchen table where I'd once spread out a green folder full of her lies, and she helped me dig the last of the carrots before the frost took them, kneeling in my dirt in her city jeans, And we didn't talk much, and we didn't have to. People ask me if I regret what I did at that golf club, if I should have spared her. I think about it every winter, and here's the only answer I've got. I didn't do it to ruin her. I did it because a person can only be erased so many times before she has to stand up and say, in a level voice, in front of everyone, I was here. I am here. I made you, and I am not ashamed of where either of us comes from, and I never was. The cruelest thing my daughter ever did was tell me to watch her life through a screen, and the truest thing I ever did was refuse to. If you've ever had to stand in a fine room and remind people you exist, leave a comment and tell me. I'll read everyone. Because the folks who are worth keeping will never once ask you to be smaller than the life you actually lived. The thing nobody tells you about being thrown away is that it gives you a strange kind of clarity. For 3 years, I let Bridget chip away at who I was, one handled at a time, because I kept telling myself love meant making myself smaller so she could feel bigger. That was my mistake, and I own it. A daughter who is allowed to be ashamed of where she comes from will keep paying for that shame with somebody else's name eventually. In my case, mine. The lies didn't appear out of nowhere. They grew the way frost grows on a window, because nobody ever stood in front of them and said no. Every door I let her lock, every excuse I swallowed, taught her she could erase me a little further and the world wouldn't push back. So when those credit statements landed on my kitchen table, I understood I'd helped build the very silence she stole inside of. That's the part I'd want you to carry home, whoever you are watching tonight. Kindness without a backbone isn't kindness. It's just permission. The day I drove 400 kilometers south with my sister and Mr. Okafor following behind, I wasn't trying to wreck Bridget's life. I was trying to do the one thing I'd failed to do for years. Tell the plain truth in a level voice and let it stand. Doing right by someone doesn't always mean protecting them from consequences. Sometimes the most decent thing you can do is refuse to let them lie their way past you. Because a person who never meets the truth never gets the chance to become honest. I think a lot about why I didn't go to the police, and I've made peace with it. It wasn't weakness. It was a choice made with my eyes open. Debts moved onto her name where they belonged. My credit restored. A daughter left to live with the full weight of what she'd done instead of hiding behind a cell door. That took more steadiness than rage ever could. Anger is loud and easy. Sitting still long enough to figure out what's actually right and then holding to it through 3 sleepless nights, that's the harder muscle, and it's the one worth building. If there's anything I'd hand to a younger version of myself, or to you, it's this. Guard your decency, because it's the one thing nobody can forge a signature on. Keep your wits about you even when your heart is breaking, because clear thinking is what got me out of that kitchen and onto the 400. And when life knocks you flat, when the ice takes your husband, when your own child buries you alive at a golf club in Oakville, get up anyway, plant the garden, the deer will eat, take up curling again, sit with a man learning to read. You are not the smallest version of yourself that someone else found convenient. You are the whole life you actually lived. And no voicemail, no screen, no daughter ashamed of the bus you drove gets to decide otherwise. I learned that at 63. I hope you learn it sooner.